Hi, everyone. Rosalie Acker here for EA 871. In this slide deck, we cover Chapter 1 of Bernard's EA Cube text. And Chapter 1 is an overview of enterprise architecture, and that's a good place to start. I will try not to belabor too many things here because it's the first chapter and we have a long ways to go. So I will try to run through this deck and know that these things will come up again and again as we go through this course. So we want to understand the purpose of EA, that EA is both a management program and an analysis and design and therefore documentation method as well. And EA is an organizing influence, and Bernard has this diagram, figure, it's a figure, not a diagram, figure 1-1. And on the left here are all these separate components, if you will: IT systems, video networks, data networks, process 1, process 2, strategic initiative 1 and 2, data flows, and they're all over here and they're not connected. Miraculously, they go through this EA cube here and they come out organized. And this cube is a nice representation of components, an EA framework, lines of business, and that encompasses these different layers of the EA stack. So at the top layer is strategy, and that of course should drive all the other things an organization does. Below strategy, we have the business layer, and we have business processes here. This is how work gets done. Below that, we have information and data. We need these obviously to function as an organization. We have systems, applications below that, and at the bottom, the foundation, we have networks and infrastructure. So we can look at this as business technology alignment. These top 2 layers have to do with business. The bottom 3 layers traditionally we think of as technology alignment. And over here we see EA equals strategy plus business plus technology. And that is a great way. And so on the left, it's discombobulated. There's no organization. Enterprise architecture puts an organization, a framework around these components, and we can organize them over here. What a beautiful picture. Right. Architecture implies a structured framework for the analysis, planning, and development of all the resources of an entity. Enterprise implies a high-level strategic view of the entire entity. Enterprise architecture is but one area of governance in an organization. To be effective, an EA program must be part of a group of management practices that form an integrated governance structure. So we have risk management, we have program management, knowledge management, we have enterprise architecture as well. So as I said, EA can be thought of as strategy plus business plus technology. Strategy plus EA is both a noun and a verb. So when I was new to enterprise architecture, I heard people talking about EA as a noun and EA as a verb, and I was like, huh? What do you mean? So as a noun, the architecture of an enterprise, it is a thing. It is a collection of models and information. It's a thing. The act of creating an enterprise architecture, that's a verb, right? And we accomplish this through a standardized process that is sustained through an ongoing management program. So here we see these different levels, and what you want to take away here, we have the strategic level, the business level, and the technology level. EA is the organizing meta context and standards authority for implementing all management and technology best practices. Now, this right here, that would rub some people the wrong way, but we'll just move on. Right, EA should serve as an authoritative reference. So you'll hear people talk about the reference architecture. That is what the organization has decided for a given function. We are going to use this set of tools to support that. It's the reference architecture. You know, and EA is therefore the architecture of the enterprise and should cover all elements and aspects. So you turn to EA when you're making new or decisions on purchasing new resources. You want to make sure that it fits with the reference architecture. And we'll talk about that more. EA is the source of reference. It's essential to avoid waste and duplication. So you don't want to have 20 ERP systems. You may plan to have multiple ERP systems, but it should be planned and not haphazard. All right, so core elements of an EA approach. There is an enterprise architecture framework that sits at the middle. There is a method, a methodology, the steps for building out the framework. The framework produces artifacts. Those are the documents. The framework instills and adheres to standards. And all this is surrounded by governance. So here, governance identifies planning, decision-making, and oversight processes and groups that will determine how EA is developed and maintained, right? Who's doing what? Don't step on my toes. Governance, in many organizations, governance is the people, they're the people that say no. Or governance, that's thought of as, these are the hoops that we have to jump through. And it's thought of at the end. Well, that's not effective governance, and so we'll talk about that. Methodology, the specific steps to establish and maintaining the enterprise architecture via the approach that's chosen. The framework identifies the scope of the overall architecture and the types of relationships and the various sub-architectures. There are different frameworks. One team will present on different frameworks, so we'll go into that. Artifacts, that's what's produced, the documentation at each of the levels. Standards must be followed, and everyone wants to do things the best way, best practices. So why is EA described as both a management program and an analysis and design method? As a management program, EA supports strategic decision making, standardized policy, decision support, resource alignment. Let's talk about that first. So strategic alignment, it connects goals, activities, and resources. Standardized policy, resource governance, and implementation. Let's look at, where's this wonderful picture? Look at this picture. I love this picture. Strategic alignment of resources and capabilities. Along the vertical, we have capability alignment, and the horizontal is resource alignment. Everything in the organization should exist to fulfill strategic goals. To support those strategic goals, there are enterprise-wide strategic initiatives, plural. There are multiple lines of business, and they have goals. And those lines of business goals should support strategic initiatives which will enable us to achieve our strategic goals. So they should all align. Within the lines of business, there are different groups and there are projects, right? All these should be aligned. Alignment, the A word, it's so hard to achieve. It's so hard. It's a goal. But enterprise architecture helps achieve alignment with capabilities. What are the capabilities that are needed to support the strategic goals? And what are our resources and where should they be put? EA gives that holistic view of an organization, and it sits between the strategic goals and the execution of those goals. So, EA is an approach. Let's look here. The basic elements of EA analysis and design. Okay, so let's talk about doing EA now. We have frameworks, we have components, we have the current architecture. To get to the future, so here's where we are, here's where the organization is now, current. Here's where it wants to be, here's where it needs to be in order, say there's a new strategic goal. What must we do to move from the current architecture and current where we are to get to the future so we can support that goal and meet that goal, right? Here we are now, here's where we want to be, how are we going to get there? So from an EA standpoint, there's the current architecture. It's comprised of lines of business and components. Here's the stack. We have strategy, business processes, data and information, applications, and network and infrastructure. And right, then we get a roadmap, a plan for moving from the current to the future. Updated strategic goals and initiatives, improved business products and services, enhanced data flows and information flows, integrated systems, optimized networks. Right. So EA as an analysis and design method provides the framework. So one framework that you hear of is Zachman. Another one is TOGAF, the Open Groups Architecture Framework. And we'll talk more about these, but a framework shows the interrelationships between the different components and the levels. For Bernard, his framework is the cube. Right? So I like these dimensions here. Framework dimension 1 are these different levels, and we can call those sub-architectures. So we have data architecture, we have business architecture, we have application architecture. The framework dimension number 2 are these segments, vertical sub-areas, lines of business. And on the horizontal, we have the artifacts that document the documents for all of these things, documentation. Right, I talked about this. I talked about this. Right, so components within each layer, we have components. And there are vertical components. Here are these layers, vertical components, and there are cross-cutting components. So cross-cutting components go across the lines of business, and vertical components you think of within a line of business. Right, it says that right here, and you don't need to worry about that. So a management plan. Okay, so let's talk about threads. Common activity that is present in all levels of the architecture. Just want you to see here. Here are the threads: security, standards, and skills. So bear with me as I jump ahead. Where were we? Right here. Security, standards, and skills. So security, that's easy to think about because we always think about security, and it cuts across everything, right? Same with standards. So we have a reference architecture, which I talked about. So fitting the architecture elements together, being able to understand how the architecture fits together is essential to planning and decision making. Right, so there's a management plan. How are we getting from point A to point B, from the current to the future? And there's this EA repository. So here's a picture of the EA repository. And that is where the artifacts are stored. So we have the documentation of the strategic plan, for example, or the business processes, or data privacy. Right? It's where these artifacts are stored. It's called the EA repository. Right. Yes, it can. I think I will leave this at this point for now. So that is an overview of Chapter 1 in Bernard.